You are a captain in the US Air Force who's been accused of treason and sentenced to be executed. You have a chance to get those charges dismissed if you take part in a government experiment involving putting you in an alien metal shell with unknown properties and detonating a nuke on top of you. You survive and emerge as a being with untold power, 18 years in the future. And that's as much of that style I'll parody, partly due to my non-existent animation skills and partly because this is not that type of video. This is about how DC acquired a character from a former rival company, made him interesting, and proceeded to diminish him to the point he's nowadays known for one thing. Captain Atom was created by Joe Gill and Steve Ditko for Charlton Comics in 1960. Once Charlton went under, the rights to the character were purchased by DC Comics, and a young budding British writer of no particular note wanted to use the character for his superhero deconstruction comic that I'm sure won't have any historical significance, but editor Dick Giordano shut him down and told him to do his own thing. I'm sure that anecdote won't go anywhere. What did happen was that Captain Atom got reinvented for DC Comics by Cary Bates and Pat Broderick, who used a novel idea to bring the character into the mainstream DC universe. They even had his adventures at Charlton Comics reimagined as US government propaganda to sell him, while they used him to spy on the superhero community. Actually, something similar happened to a character called Miracle Man, whose old adventures were reinterpreted for a modern audience by some writer whose name I can't remember. Oh, I'm sure he wasn't particularly influential in any way. As for Cap's solo series, it was really good. Bates actually decides to move past the whole man out of time struggling to adjust to the modern day angle, and instead focused entirely on how Nathaniel Adam had to deal with the fact that everyone he knew had mourned and moved on from him, especially his daughter, who is now an adult, as opposed to the kid he remembers her as. He also has to deal with the fact that his wife has died and remarried the man responsible for framing him in the first place. And the worst part is, despite everything that has happened, that man, General Wade Eiling, still has power over him. Captain Atom was a deeply political series that was in good company with some of the other titles DC was putting out at the time, and is well worth a read if you can find it, because sadly this series was never collected. However, Cap was also added to the roster of Justice League International, and after he clears his name and comes clean with everything, becomes the leader of the newly formed Justice League Europe. Everything's looking up for old Nathaniel Adam. Of course, the good times never last, and speaking of time, we have to talk about the event Armageddon 2001, whose whole thesis was that a hero in the DC universe would go bad and become the villain of the event, Monarch. Now, if you are picking up context clues, you have probably already deduced that Captain Atom was supposed to be Monarch. Except somehow, in the days before the modern internet, that twist got leaked. And because the story did not have anything going for it outside of the twist, DC changed who Monarch was from Captain Atom to the hero Hawk. Unfortunately, the damage was done. Cap's solo series was cancelled, he got written out of the final arc of the Giffen DeMatteis Maguire JLI, and the character lost whatever momentum he had going for him. Most of his supporting cast was gone, and he continued to drift from one title to the next, mostly as a background character, and occasionally showed up when someone wanted to use a superhero with a connection to the US military. He probably had his most notable role in some time in the first arc of the Superman Batman series, playing superhero stooge to the Lex Luthor presidency. I'm sure some of you will even recognize this story as it was turned into an animated movie. However, the movie, like most superhero adaptations, fails to do its source material justice, as unlike the movie where Batman gets the big heroic moment of flying the giant composite Superman Batman mech into the kryptonite meteor, it's actually Captain Atom who does it, and is presumed dead. He's instead sent over to the Wildstorm universe. It's the world where the Authority are from, which was the plot of the series Captain Atom Armageddon. Meanwhile, DC nearly rebooted the character in the main universe. However, at the last minute, they created an original character named Breach. Said original character got heat vision by Superboy Prime in the event Infinite Crisis, which led to Captain Atom popping back into the DC universe, now battered and leaking energy. So, now that DC has tried everything with this character, even nearly rebooting him, what's left but to make him Monarch for real? To contain his leaking energy, Cap's put in a containment suit that just happens to look like the Monarch suit. And of course, his leaking energy has seemingly led to him being a few elements short of a periodic table. And thus began the tale of Captain Atom as Monarch, as he gallivanted across the multiverse, recruiting villains and throwing heroes into gladiatorial combat, all of which culminated into Superboy Prime trying to kill him to death and blowing him up again. If you couldn't tell from that description, the whole thing was a disaster and basically turned Captain Atom into a genocidal maniac. But that's nothing that can't be swept under the rug with the power of retcons. Consequences of terrible actions are, well, of no consequence. We tried out that Monarch thing, and it turns out we were drinking from a poisoned chalice to begin with, so please let us use Captain Atom again. And so Cap is brought back to his status quo in a back of Action Comics, which reveals that he doesn't remember what he did as Monarch, and he feels really sorry that he did it, so the Justice League forgive him. And on that note, ends this version of Captain Atom. But there were three things that would soon irreversibly change Captain Atom for the worse. A full-on continuity reboot, heightened awareness of that indie graphic novel by that unknown British writer, and the departure of Paul Levitz as president of DC Comics, who actually kept that indie comic from influencing the main universe. So, Captain Atom gets a brand new title in the New 52 relaunch, where he has an appearance far too similar to the character he inspired. He's significantly taller, looks more like an energy being, and is more blue than silver. His new series only lasted for 12 issues, and he once again faded into the background like before. Well, that's it, right? He showed promise and ended up a background character, which happens to 95% of all Big Two's characters. But this doesn't explain...
It's too late.
Oh, I need to explain how Captain Atom became synonymous with the guy that goes boom whenever he shows up. The first recognizable instance of this happening was in Kingdom Come, where an alternate version of Captain Atom gets split open and explodes. This has a huge impact on the story, as the explosion leads to Kansas becoming an irradiated wasteland, which is the catalyst that kicks off the events of the story. However, in that story, Captain Atom was split open by the Parasite, who had absorbed Cap's nuclear powers. Yes, the only thing that could crack Cap open was his own powers. However, thanks to the passage of time and the general mishandling of the character, Captain Atom became well known for one thing: going boom. Now, much like how Jean Grey's tendency to die and come back to life has been over exaggerated, Cap hasn't actually died from explosions that much in mainstream continuity. That's because his powers are to absorb energy, and if he overdid it, he'd get flung around in space and time for a bit before returning to his current timeline. However, just like Kingdom Come, most of these instances have been in alternate universes where Captain Atom was usually a supporting character. So he's only remembered in those stories for doing one thing: going boom. And of course, the influence of the inspired on the inspiration is quite noticeable, as one of the most noticeable things Dr. Manhattan has done was getting blown up. And in a final twist, it would appear that Captain Atom has started to emulate Dr. Manhattan's mannerisms as well as his tendency to get blown up, considering how the character has been depicted in the recent Tom King miniseries Jenny Sparks. Of course, this just means the formerly good captain has lost his mind and wants to be a god among men because of what he can do. Now, where have I heard that before?